You've probably heard of evidence-based policing. It is becoming increasingly ingrained in UK police forces, and quite frankly, it's about time. When we say evidence in this context, we are not talking about forensic evidence such as DNA or fingerprints. We are talking about something that has been proven to be true. So, if you're making your decisions in an evidence-based way, that simply means you are making your decisions based on what has been shown to work or what has been shown not to work. This is a much better decision-making process than just going with what you've always been doing or going with your gut. Although individual professional experience does have its place and can be very valuable, it might be biased and tainted by opinions and other external factors that make it unreliable. On the other hand, if you base your decisions on a solid evidence base, that simply means you use information on what has been tested and scientifically shown to work or not to work through methodological research. We've been taking it for granted that medicine is evidence-based, in that we would not accept a medical procedure or medication unless it had been tried and tested before. Evidence-based policing still lags behind the field of medicine, but there has been great progress. Cambridge criminologist Lawrence Sherman first coined the term evidence-based policing in 1998. At the time, he was still working with the US police force. He also defined the process of targeting, testing, and tracking, which describes how any practice or process should be taken through an evaluation to form part of the evidence base. The evidence base is simply the accumulation of what we know. There are two ways of using the evidence base. When you consult the evidence base to make a decision, you can do so by speaking to people about their experience and learning of using a certain process, by reading research on the topic, or by looking it up on the internet, for example. The second way of using the evidence base is to contribute to it. When you have tried and tested something, such as a way of doing things or some technique or a piece of equipment, you should ideally publish that in some way, so that others can benefit from your learning. There are police networks online and various groups in which investigative practitioners can do so. Even if you found that something does not work, that could be really valuable for someone else to know, if perhaps they were considering using what you've tried. Ideally, this testing of the process should take place in a way that is methodologically sound and should really test the actual process in question without too many other variables that could influence the result. For example, if a police force is trialing a new way of dealing with encountering members of the public in the street, you can't really measure the impact of this unless all officers who are meant to be using this new technique are actually using it properly and consistently. That is why we set up experiments, which are tests and evaluations of processes, but in a controlled way. If you implement the testing process properly and test it properly, and you then find that it has produced different results to the business-as-usual process, you should be able to say that the difference in outcomes is probably due to the differences in process, and not other random factors. The whole point of research is to exclude those other factors so that we can safely assume it really is the change in process that has caused the change in results. If we can't say that, we simply cannot state whether the new process has any impact or not. I'll let some other people define evidence-based policing for you.
Evidence-based policing is a strategy for making a decision. It's a way of deciding exactly what the problem is based on some idea of where this problem is likely to be heading, just like when a doctor takes various measurements to find out what kind of illness a patient has. A police officer can go to a domestic and try to figure out how dangerous this situation is. And the problem that we have in doing that just based on experience is twofold. First, most police don't know what's going to happen with the couple they're dealing with right now over the next 6 months or 6 years. They can't know that because they normally don't have any kind of follow-up experience. And the second problem is that they can never have enough contact with people to cover the tens of thousands of cases that a police department or even a police district can have in the course of a year. So when doctors are trained in medical school to classify diseases, they have a basis for that classification in research on hundreds of thousands of cases. With police, we now have a study in Kent, England, with 371,000 cases of domestic violence that has produced totally new insights onto how you can classify the cases that you're dealing with. And you are able then to consult the police data systems in a way that would allow you to make a much better decision about whether this case could be a murder tonight, or in the vast majority of cases, the police will never see this couple again.
In the police service, we have thousands of rules on how you get evidence that you put before a court. You can only do it in certain ways. You have to know that the evidence is really good. You've got to test it. And that testimony is really important. And we understand the rationale for that. But when we are engaging in certain tactics, or we have an idea, the level of evidence we require to start that idea or that tactic is non-existent. So someone just has a bright idea and they say, we're going to do this from this point on. And if we use examples of bright ideas that have gone wrong because they haven't been based on evidence, then that sometimes tells the story. So the famous one is of Scared Straight, where police officers naturally think, well, what we need to do is get naughty kids, send them to a prison, get them to meet inmates, and they'll be so scared that they won't commit crime anymore, antisocial behaviour. And in fact, when they took an evidence-based approach, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, it showed that the kids became worse as a result of that. Similarly, taking drugs into school and talking kids through drugs has shown to be at best ineffective and sometimes more harmful. So an evidence-based approach means we analyse whether the tactics we're engaging in are really effective or not. And it goes beyond where policing normally is, which is there's a problem, we engage in a tactic, and then we see if there's a problem after that. The sort of before and after approach that has plagued policing. And I equate it to this little story, really. You know, I've been a senior leader in policing, but I've been a PC as well, and I've seen senior leaders stand up and say, you know, since I've taken over this command, burglary has gone down 20%. And what that leader is saying is, because of my great leadership, burglary's gone down 20%. And as a constable, I know that's not down to your great leadership. But when crime goes up 20%, the same leader doesn't go in front of his staff or her staff and say, burglary's gone up and I'm sorry, it's because I'm a really rubbish police officer and I don't know how to lead you. They start saying, you know, it's because sentences are too short, it's because there's issues with the economy, no one can get a job, bad parenting, all these, you know, socioeconomic factors. And the truth is, as a leader, you can't have it both ways. So we have to be evidence-based. And that means adopting research methods that will tell us whether we are being effective or not, or research methods to understand what the real problem is. And it's saying, what is the best way of trying to answer the question you're posing as a police officer? So if it is, how do we get burglary down? How do we get robbery down? How do we get violence down? It's not saying, I know the idea. It's saying, well, I have an idea and I'm going to test it to see whether that's effective. I think that's a very long-winded way, but probably a necessarily long-winded way of speaking through what evidence-based policing is.
I would say evidence-based policing is about evidence-informed practice. It's about practice, in this case by police, that's informed and guided by an evidence base, hopefully a robust evidence base, but which also relies on the professional judgment of the individual concerned.
I think different people have different standards of evidence, which is correct. But broadly speaking, evidence-based policing is a means of reassuring yourself that what you are doing, operationally or any other activity relating to policing, is based on good evidence and being measured for its effectiveness. So at the Behavioural Insights team, we our standard is empirical measurement. So we prefer actually observing impact rather than self-reported evidence. We also, where possible, use design a counterfactual, so we can see what would have happened had we not done whatever it is we're doing. So there are different methods for doing that, and there are also limitations to that. So if you're measuring, for example, tactics for counter-extremism, it's quite hard to do that empirically, so you have to design other measures to observe. So yeah, broadly speaking, evidence-based policing is ensuring whatever it is you're doing is based on the best available evidence, and when you do it, you find a way of measuring it as robustly as is possible.
I think this is one of my biggest bugbears about evidence-based policing is that a team of people, platoon police officers, academics, will partner with a local policing district or area, and they will deliver an experiment. They'll track where officers are going. They will track what officers are doing when they're there. They might even do community surveys to look at trust and confidence. But the moment that experiment stops and there's enough data gathered, the tracking stops, the feedback stops, and inevitably, and quite sadly, the business as usual prior to the experiment goes back to normal. Now, if I was going to go and run Armadale again, I would factor in a 2 or 3 month period after we'd hit the point where we got enough data to say, right, we're going to continue to run this experiment and allow that lag to be able to go and conduct the analysis and then go back to the leadership teams there to say, here's the effect, here's what we found. Now you can either continue to do those patrols if we've had a positive effect, or if actually they've made no difference, then maybe we need to rethink it. But I think if I was going to, any future experiments I run around this particular space or anything else, I think I will be factoring in exactly that. So we don't, all that hard work and effort that goes into changing what business as usual is, doesn't just get, doesn't just return to, pre-experiment conditions, if that makes sense.
So, now that you know what it is, how can you use evidence-based policing in your daily work? Not every practitioner or academic is able to set up a proper trial and evaluation, although more and more police forces now have someone or a team who could potentially do that for them. But if you can't do that, here's what you can do even if you're in this all by yourself. 1. Start questioning why we do things in the way we do them. If the answer you get is, because we've always done it this way, or that's just how it's done here, or simply an unimpressive, I don't know, you can safely assume this process is not based on the best evidence available. Suggest that you do some reading on whether there might be a better way of doing it and look into it. 2. Speak to colleagues or others who seem to be quite clued up about what they do and ask them about their experience and their reasons for doing things. Usually, they might have quite good reasons for why they do things in a certain way. 3. Consult the evidence base, which simply means try to find relevant and useful information on the topic you're looking into. See if you can find information that could convince a decision maker to give something else a try, or at least to let you give it a try in a systematic way. 4. Try to find people in your force who know about and are supportive of evidence-based policing and talk to them about the idea you would like to test. Read up on it and see if you can go on any courses to educate yourself in this area. 5. Contact people who have already tried out similar research and speak to them. 6. Try to convince a decision maker, hopefully with the evidence you found and the support of others you have identified, that a new process or technique should be tested. 7. If possible, get involved in testing it, ideally with the support of others who can help design a proper evaluation around it so that you can be confident in your findings. 8. Tell others about what you've found. 9. Continually try to educate yourself and others more in this area. Best of luck. There's a lot of information out there and a lot of people who would be happy to give advice on research they have already done. Start by finding more of the information you want and see where it leads you. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this content useful. You can get access to each episode's transcript with key learning points, timestamps and references if you get yourself onto my mailing list. Just go to the main EBP Doctor website on ebpdoctor.com, and on the bottom of each page you will find a sign-up form for notifications of new content. Just enter your first name, your preferred email address, and the type of organization you work for. You will not get any spam. This is just for me to let you know about new content and for you to get access to all the transcripts.